Our lives are laid out on a road of bumps, turns, struggles, and more. How do we respond? How do we endure adversity for learning and growth? I'm Aubrey Johnson, and we'll explore these questions and more on the Road to Rediscovery. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Road to Rediscovery. I'm your host, Aubrey Johnson. The Road to Rediscovery is about reflecting on life lessons to learn and grow from them, and of course, pay it forward and uplift others who are struggling through dark times. Now, as you've heard in countless previous episodes, this show takes a pretty deep dive into our darkest days, struggles, adversities, transformations, and more. And at times, I'll admit it gets pretty heavy, but it's absolutely quite necessary for helping others and giving people hope. With that said, for a lighter, more spirited conversation, I want to personally invite you to subscribe to our second podcast, our sister podcast, Talking in Threes. Here, we'll talk about three of our favorite anything, countless topics from sports to pizza toppings, ice cream toppings, movies, TVs, shows, animals, and so much more. I also invite you to share your favorite three things as well. To be a part of it, just join our public Facebook group and subscribe to the podcast. I will leave links to both in the episode show notes. All right. My special guest is a self-proclaimed returning citizen. Having served time in San Quentin, he's accepted his journey, forged his path, and is on a mission of societal transformation and challenges us to do the same. He's also an author and manages his own blog, Wayne's Substack. He's a man of reflection, lesson learning, and introspection. We're going to hear about those lessons learned, including the importance of family and the power of change. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome Wayne Boatwright to the show. Wayne, welcome to the show, sir. It's so great to have you here.
Thank you, Aubrey. I appreciate it. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Oh, likewise. We're ecstatic to have you here, man. So, Wayne, we have a lot to unpack, all right? I feel at least. From a successful career as an attorney to prison, can you start us off by giving us a glimpse into what life was like for Wayne and family before that pivotal, tragic incident?
Oh, interesting. Well, I'll give you an idea of what it was like to then Wayne, and then what it is like to now Wayne as I perceive it.
Great.
I've discovered quite a bit about myself through my journey, not just my incarceration, but a lot of the introspection and work I did inside prison and since I've come home.
Mhm.
And I like to say I burned down my psychic delusion house and then I had to rebuild it as an adult. So what I mean by that is I had I had the classic American meritocracy story as my life story that I told myself, the narrative, the script that I played for myself.
Mhm.
So, I was raised by a single mother with a half brother in rent control housing in LA on food stamps. Got my first job at 16, bought my family's first car, my family's first TV, worked very hard. My senior year in high school, I only went to school for 2 periods and I did work study the rest of the day. So further education wasn't my focus. My focus was survival
Yeah.
and just trying to get by and make life a little better for myself, my mother, my grandmother, and my brother.
Mhm.
But I always knew I had potential. And the way I tried to exercise that potential was I created a little mantra for myself, and it was
Mhm.
better, faster, stronger.
Mhm.
So I knew that for me to succeed, I had to be better, faster, stronger.
Mhm.
And that mantra as a form of pride is what it engendered in me. But that pride was very useful for me. It got me to start going to a junior college when I was 21, taking remedial courses, going on to a regular university, and ultimately going to Cornell Law School and becoming a lawyer. And I got to tell you, from a kid from the West Coast, from the San Fernando Valley, the thought of going to an Ivy League law school was a dream come true
Oh,
in
wow.
so many ways.
Yeah.
Um, and and probably the first gigantic shock of my life,
Mhm.
um, because I was woefully unprepared
Mhm.
for that experience.
Yeah.
Um, I finally got somewhere where being smart wasn't enough. You had to be disciplined, and you
Mm.
had to be learned and educated and articulate,
Mhm.
things that I wasn't that good at, but I knew I was smart, right? And
Right.
that had suited me well up until that point. So law school wasn't an easy road by any stretch of the imagination. It was a tough 3 years, but ones that I rolled up my sleeves and took just as seriously as I had my prior life. For
Right.
example, I worked throughout law school, unlike many of my classmates who focused only on their studies.
Mhm.
I'm not talking about the summer internship. I'm talking about during the school years I was working
Oh, wow.
because I didn't want to take a lot of debt on and
Yeah.
borrow money, right? I wanted to take care of myself. So that philosophy suited me very well.
Mhm.
Um, but I now the current Wayne recognizes the shortcomings of that uh, defense mechanism, which is what that philosophy really was. I was using it to protect myself, not just to
Mhm.
improve myself.
Mhm.
I had to be
Mhm.
better, faster, stronger because I couldn't trust anybody, right?
Mm.
I had this fear that other people were not reliable. So I had to do it on my own. That had been my experience my whole life.
Mm.
And so that defense mechanism that had suited me so well until that point started to fail me as I began my time in the legal profession, both as a student, where you need to have study groups to do well and work with
Yeah.
others,
Right.
something I wasn't very good at
Mhm.
joining. But also as a law firm, when you go to a law firm, the key component of any legal uh, profession is to find yourself a mentor who can kind of guide you through that process.
Right.
And I wasn't able to develop that relationship. And this is where a lot of these different issues that I'm sure you talk about a lot on the road to rediscovery. I love that word rediscovery, by the way. I
Oh,
love that
yeah.
word. It's not new. It's
No,
not
it's
new.
not.
We're
No.
rediscovering something. You just don't
Yep.
recognize you've forgotten it. Um,
100%.
right. And so what I realized was I was raised in a home where adult men were evil.
Yeah.
They abandon you, they leave you, they don't take care of you, they beat you. You know what my mother and grandmother had gone through with their marriages and relationships had had created an orientation for me unconsciously. I only realized this later through years of introspection and hard individual work,
Right.
had gotten me to believe that I can't trust men either. So
Oh,
I couldn't find a
I see.
mentor to guide me as, kind of like a father figure in a lot of ways, right?
Right.
That's what a mentor is.
Yep.
I couldn't trust a person like that. So I wasn't
Mhm.
able to develop that relationship. Um, and it has good things and bad things. It was great in one way because it motivated me to go overseas and become a foreign legal consultant. And
Yeah.
so after practicing law for 2 years, passed the California bar the first time. Like I
Mm.
said, I was smart. These weren't hard things.
Yeah.
Um, uh, Worked in LA for 2 years and then realized I wanted more. And I had always had a focus on international, global relations. I was always a curious, adventuresome kid, even. So
Mhm.
I had an opportunity to go to Korea and I worked for the dominant law firm in South Korea. And when I
Yeah.
say dominant, people say, okay, it's Korea, whatever. This firm now generates over $1 billion in billings every year. And for our audience who think they know what a billion is, I'm going to do something I practice with my kids when I say this. Don't call it a billion. It's $1,000 million is what
Right.
it is.
Yeah.
Now you
Yeah.
understand it. It's a
Mhm.
$1,000 million. And that's what that law firm generates. And I got to work there and had all the adventure I could ever want as a lawyer for the 6 years I was there. And in fact, met my wife and the mother of our two children while I
Mm.
was there.
Mhm.
Um, and and after being there for 6 years, I knew I wanted to come back. I took a global position with a company called Accenture, which is a global multinational consulting firm, very
Yep.
large.
Yep.
Um, and in my global position, I got to travel all over the world with them.
Mhm.
And I brought my wife with me because I was smart enough to take advantage of that.
Of
So whether
course.
it was Athens or Paris or Sydney or Tokyo or London or Madrid, whatever, she got to come see those places with me.
Yeah.
But again, I got bit by the startup bug. Now, this is something you may not be that familiar with. We all think we know what Silicon Valley is about, but I got to tell you, I was based in Palo Alto for work and lived in San Francisco when I moved back to the US in 1998. So I got to see the tech explosion that happened. In fact, I went through two of them, right?
Right.
I loved it. The creativity, the desire to try something new, the willingness to explore and take risks just enthralled me. And so I
Wow.
left my safe, big job at Accenture and became an independent lawyer and consultant working with startups.
Mm.
Um, but again, that defense mechanism, and that's what it was. That's what the pride was, and that's what the mantra was: better, faster, stronger.
Right.
I suddenly found it wasn't as useful. It wasn't as useful as I needed.
Okay.
So how could I cope with that failure? How could I cope with that challenge that I didn't know how to overcome because I had limited my options,
Right.
right? I couldn't ask for help. I
Nope.
couldn't find a mentor.
Right.
I had to do it. And I was finding I couldn't do it.
Yeah.
A lot of the stuff in that area is totally brand new. There's no track record to follow, right?
Right.
You're blazing a new trail.
Hmm.
And so as those challenges came up, I started seeking coping mechanisms, as we all do.
Yeah.
Now, in my case, the coping mechanism was alcohol.
Hmm.
And that's what it is. I think we do ourselves a disservice when we identify it merely as an addiction or as a illness.
Hmm.
No, it's a coping mechanism. We're
Hmm.
using that to deal with an underlying problem. And unfortunately, I think much of our mental health professionals and other experts focus so much on the addiction, which again
Right.
is merely a coping mechanism, and don't address the underlying issue that had you choose that coping mechanism. And the coping mechanism could be gambling, it could be smoking, it could be drugs, it could be alcohol, it could be sex, right?
Yeah.
Those are all coping mechanisms. And I think in our society, we've lost sight of that. We think that's the issue. Oh, if you just cure that alcoholism, you'll be fine. It's like, well,
Yeah.
no, then I have to replace it with a different coping mechanism unless I deal with the underlying problem.
Yeah, that's right.
And
And Wayne, quick question about that.
mm,
This is great stuff, and I want us to continue. But hey, quick question about that.
sure.
Um, when it comes to the terms, okay, addiction
Mm,
and coping mechanism,
mm,
um, does the term coping mechanism target is that term more targeted from a accountability perspective than say addiction? And if so, is that part of the reason why that root cause is, I don't know, misdiagnosed and just termed as an addiction?
oh, interesting. Interesting. Um, Y- yes, I think our society seeks to find simple answers to complex problems,
Okay.
right? There are a myriad of coping mechanisms, but there are also a myriad of underlying issues that might
Sure.
drive you to seek that coping mechanism. It's not a simple
Yeah.
answer, and it's unique to each individual. I would take it another level, though, that I was lucky enough to also live in Argentina for 2 years, as well as in Korea for 6, and had a global position with Accenture. So I
Yeah.
worked a lot with different cultures and different languages. English is a language that's horizontal. Korea is a language that's vertical.
Yes.
Uh, you have like 6 different tenses to a verb depending on the status of the person as you talk vertically, right? Hierarchical. We're horizontal. We're all middle class. We all use the same simple verbiage. But the other challenge with our language is it's noun based, not verb based.
Mm,
And what I mean by that is when we say you're an addict or you have an addiction, these are nouns that we're using.
yeah.
So it's a permanent state. If we used a verb, I have an addictive personality, or I have I have this, this active word for addiction
Yeah.
rather than the noun, then I think we'd have a better flexibility. We paint
Mm,
ourselves into a corner not just with our cultural standards, a fee-for-service healthcare system that has to call it something if it wants to get paid, for example. It's
Right.
an addiction. So I'm going to call it that so I can get paid for it. But we also have a problem in our language with this concept of using a noun, which is a permanent state. This would be, yes, I took AA for a number of years. AA wants you to recognize and keep to the forefront your addiction and always admit you're an addict. And I understand that mindset given our culture and our language.
Right.
But I would contend you don't have to keep that at the center of your identity. I do
Identity.
not dance to the
Yes.
12 step personally, even though many
Right.
people have found it very successful. And I
Sure.
admire them and I'm grateful they found something that worked.
Yeah.
Another way of characterizing the same term is there's something that is a trigger that has you seek your coping mechanism. And that trigger is that underlying trauma. Now we're going to get into another level of problem here. Trauma is not the event. You had a woman on recently who was sexually abused as a child.
Right.
I would contend the sexual abuse itself, that traumatic act or event, isn't the issue. For most people, trauma is how do you respond to the traumatic event. That's why
Yeah.
some people could have the same challenges as others and seem to be able to go on normally. And people say,
Yeah.
well, why is that? And we try to blame our genes and we try to blame these other things. No, it's because I think it's because you're looking at the wrong issue. The event is not the trauma. The trauma is how do you respond to that event.
Yeah.
You may
Yeah.
respond by developing a defense mechanism that's unhealthy. For
Right.
example, have you ever heard of Gabor Mate, since you do a lot of stuff in this space?
Um,
Gabor Mate's written a bunch of books. He's a Canadian, Hungarian immigrant, but he was basically raised in Canada, professor, a lot
Gotcha.
of work, clinical work as a doctor with people dealing with addiction. And his concepts of explaining this, that trauma is how you respond to an event, not the
Yeah.
event itself, is brilliant. And I'd recommend for anyone in your audience, if they're curious about this, just do a search on Gabor Mate, Mate, and they'll find him. So this is the conceptual frame. And if you take me down that road, I'm going to go there. So these are some of the things that I have learned, and never would have learned, if my coping mechanism of addiction hadn't gotten so bad
Right.
that I became a drunk driver and was so drunk and so proudful that I thought I could continue to
Yeah.
drink and drive, that I
Yeah.
got blackout drunk and had a head-on collision going the wrong way on a freeway.
Oh my goodness.
That's how bad my coping mechanism of alcoholism had become. And
Yeah.
yes, by that stage, it had become a physical addiction. But
Yeah.
that's not where it started, and that's not where it will end, even if you can deal with that. You have to get to this concept of the trigger, as I see it. And I think
Right.
many of our professionals, they build a wall around that trigger so you can't trigger it.
Yeah.
That's what they teach you to do. Matthew Perry, the
Oh yeah.
TV
The
movie
actor.
star
Mhm. Yeah.
who recently passed away,
Yeah.
he probably spent millions of dollars trying to deal with his addiction.
I'm sure.
Not to mention he spent millions of dollars on his addiction, probably.
Yeah. Yeah.
But my point is, he found a way around all the walls he had been taught to build and
Yeah.
got to that trigger. That coping mechanism was more important to him. It gave
Yeah.
him a sense of safety at an emotional level
Right.
that he probably didn't even recognize consciously. And so he went back to it and he found a way around all the defense mechanisms and walls that he built around that to get to that trigger. In my philosophy, you have to dismantle that trigger. And to do that, you have to face whatever that underlying trauma, not just the act that had you build the defense mechanisms and coping mechanisms you're using, but that whole process. Only
Right.
then can you actually heal. And heal is rediscovery, because in essence, what we're saying is trying you to get back to your authentic or your complete self and not have parts of you broken off as a defense mechanism. Many people, for example, that I dealt with, and I went to San Quentin State Prison as an inmate, and I was on what's called the main line, which is no safety for me. I was with the guys who had all,
Gen Pop.
yeah, I was in the general population, and
Yeah.
I
Okay.
I learned a lot there, but I
Mhm.
also learned that the number one defense mechanism that probably everybody uses is they shut off some or all of their emotional self. Then they don't have empathy. How do you explain the acts they've done if they had an ounce of access to their empathetic part of themselves? We all have
Right.
empathy. It's built into us as humans,
That's right.
right? It's
That's
who
right.
we are. They think they don't because
Mm.
of the defense mechanisms they've dealt to shut off their emotions, to deal with the experiences that they had, virtually all of them as young children,
The
because
walls are
that's when
so
many
tall.
of these defense mechanisms are built. They don't even know
Yeah.
it's a defense mechanism. They think it's who they are.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the irony, is the defense mechanism has been with them so long, they think
Mhm.
it is them. But
Mm.
learning how to recognize, no, this is a defense mechanism that I built, and I need to dismantle this
Right. It's
and
not
see
who
what's
you are.
underneath and release
Yeah.
that part of myself that I've locked up and hidden away
Yeah.
to become a complete person is what rediscovery is, in my interpretation of that word.
Well, I appreciate you clarifying and being so articulate in what the rediscovery meant for you, and also painting a picture in the mind's eye of, identifying the trigger, and as well as, having those defensive walls built up over so much time. To your point earlier, these walls are solid, they're tall, and over so much time the inmates have built these walls to where they think it's their identity, it's who they are, when really there's so many layers beneath what they've built over the years. It takes an awful lot to for them to rediscover who they are prior to when those walls were first built. Wayne, this is absolutely extraordinary. And I want to ask about the process. Okay.
Mm,
And part of the process in your starting your journey of reflection and introspection, which I'm guessing may have happened when you started your journey in San Quentin. Did you feel that um, part of that part of that road to rediscovery for you, did it require enduring, I don't want to say the consequences, but enduring the cause and effect of that incident?
it did, um, and that journey is a common journey within San Quentin. I won't say
Yeah.
all prisons. San
Mhm.
Quentin is based in Marin County, about half an hour north of San Francisco. And
Okay.
in many ways, I think it's analogous to Silicon Valley. San Quentin
Mm,
is the Silicon Valley of criminal justice reform and restorative justice. It has a
I see.
myriad of different nonprofits and
Yeah.
organizations who come in and volunteer their time and effort
Mhm.
to help men on their journey of
Good.
rediscovery, and
Mhm.
all focus on different facets and in different ways. Um, I was lucky to go to San Quentin, and the because I had access to those groups, and I
Yes.
stayed in the Gen Pop because I wasn't going to go into a safety situation where I wouldn't have access to those groups. It was important to me to
Right.
learn this. Um, it's not just knowing something needs to be done, right? The real issue is, how do you then do it?
Yeah.
And you need a power source. You need an energy source. And I have to tell you, I had two energy sources,
Mhm.
and they weren't God. Um, they weren't intrinsic desire to change. I had shut off parts of myself that
Sure,
probably
sure.
knew I needed to change, but I couldn't talk to them. Right?
Right.
I had shut them off so long ago. I didn't even know they were me.
Yeah, yeah.
No, the power for me was the power of murder. I took a life, Aubrey. I took a
Yeah.
life.
Yeah.
I injured others,
Mhm.
but I tore a woman out of her family before her time.
Mhm.
She was never allowed to say goodbye. Her family was never allowed to say goodbye to her.
Mhm.
Um, if if you think you know what power is, you have a very different perception of it when you take a life.
I see.
And and at that point, you need to choose: do you want to continue to use that power in
Right.
the same way you did,
Right.
or do you have to take responsibility for it and learn to control it?
Right.
So the realization I had was I had this immense, frightening power. I could take a life. And I had to make sure that I would do everything I could to learn whatever I needed to learn and unlearn whatever I needed to unlearn so that I would never put anybody else at risk of taking their life again. I had to take responsibility, not
Yeah.
just for the act,
Right.
for the power the act represents.
Yes.
That's what it motivated me to do this work. Do you think I wanted to re-examine my childhood? Come on. I mean,
Yeah.
my childhood had suited me quite well
Yeah. Yeah.
as far as I knew,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Um, so no, it was the power, but I'd say the an equal power um, was the amazing gift of parenthood and to have two young children that I was responsible for because
Right.
I had destroyed their trust in me. And
Right.
I had an obligation, I had a duty to do all that I could to
Yeah.
both show them I could take responsibility for my actions
Mhm.
and face them as an adult, not hide from them, but
Right.
also to be an example that I could learn from my mistakes and my failures and the tragedy that I had
Yeah.
caused. Because in essence, I didn't destroy one family with my crime, I destroyed
Right.
two families with
Right.
my crime. That's the reality.
Yeah.
Less than 6 months into my sentence, the mother of my two children uh, came by herself and asked me for a divorce.
Mm.
Um, when I talk about burning down my psychic delusion house, I'm not talking about my self-image as a good person, just that,
N Right.
right?
Yeah.
It's much more than that. Um, but those kids didn't, um, th- they had been hurt enough by my actions.
Right.
My job was to become the best parent and the best co-parent I
Right.
could possibly be
Right.
to them, especially given the fact they were only 6 and 8 when I went to prison. So they were very young.
My dear
Um,
man.
um, and to her eternal credit,
Yeah.
my ex, I like calling her just ex. It just sounds good to me.
Yeah.
My ex honored her commitment to bring our children to visit me in San Quentin my full time in prison, regardless of what was happening with her
Yeah.
career or
Yeah.
personal life. She knew she had made that commitment and she honored that commitment, and it was essential for me. Um, and my uh, recovery and road to rediscovery, to have access to my children, to be reminded of the responsibilities that I had, not
Yes.
just to make sure I didn't take another life, but to do all I could to make sure I hadn't ruined the lives of two young children. Because are you familiar with something called the ACE score? ACE stands for Adverse Childhood Experience Score. Federal
No.
government has created this. It's a brilliant concept where they look at uh, chaos generating events in children's lives. Unstable household, moving a lot, loss of a job of a parent, loss of a parent, divorce, sickness. It could be a myriad of different things.
Sure.
These are all called ACE events, negative events. My children now had a bunch of negative events that had occurred to them.
Mhm.
So,
Mhm.
what could I do to help them stay as stable as possible so they could, yes, they've been wounded. Okay.
Yeah,
But that wound had to become a scar, and they had to stop being a victim and become a survivor.
that's right.
That was the goal that I had. I wanted them to become
Yeah.
survivors. And
Mhm.
I knew I had a responsibility, not just as their father, but as the one that had actually caused the wounds that they had faced. There was 18 months where my young son wouldn't visit me in prison
Mhm.
because he was made fun of and made to feel shame
Yeah.
by his classmates because his father was a criminal and was in
Um,
prison.
mm,
And so the hurt that he experienced. Now, of course, developmentally, we need to use the right language. He thought he was angry,
yeah.
but that wasn't anger. That was
Mhm.
shame. That was other emotions that he didn't have the sophistication to articulate or deal with. Nor was it the time for me to educate him. That time
Right.
would come.
Yep.
That time would come.
Yeah.
At that time, my job was to try to stay as connected with him as I could. And successfully, after 18 months, he came back to visit regularly. And we have
Good.
maintained that strong relationship. In fact, we're recording this today on a Thursday. Tomorrow, Friday, is the home opener of the San Francisco Giants baseball team.
Yeah.
And my son is home on from spring break. He's a sophomore at university back east, and we're
Great.
going to go to the opening game tomorrow,
Oh,
the
that's
home opener
wonderful,
tomorrow.
Wayne.
We
Wayne,
have
that's
a we have an intimate relationship. It is a
oh,
beautiful relationship.
and
And I
and if you don't mind, I just have to say, I mean, the example you gave me of you and your son going to the Giants opener, okay? I mean, is a manifestation of of your commitment to become the best parent and co-parent, and your ex's commitment to honor in bringing the children, while you were in San Quentin. And I mean, those are foundational, that leads
yeah,
up to this wonderful time you're going to spend with your son on Friday at the Giants opener. I really truly must commend you and your ex, with her and honoring her commitment, to bring the children, in you in taking that self accountability, and just, quite honestly, introspect and reflect and look for those areas in where you needed to improve, and to just outright say, I let my children down. I destroyed not one family but two families. I mean, that's a lot to say. And before you started explaining that, Wayne, I was going to ask you, what was your north star in helping you navigate through this when you served? And you explained two things. One thing being your children, I was expecting. Okay, I mean, we always want to work hard for our children and provide and be the best we can for them. But the other thing I didn't expect, and you really eloquently explained why, is the power of murder, and taking that in, and what you did in taking a life, because that helped reframe and reset yourself in in just being quite transparent and saying, I can't take another life. I have to learn from this. I really, really must commend you, for that, because again, I mean, you could have easily fell into the same, I don't want to say trap, but the same ditch as as the inmates, and
and many of
start
them
building
do.
these walls,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
many of them do, unfortunately. I wish
Mm,
more took advantage of these programs that are available,
yes.
but a good number do. When I said I wasn't the only one,
Yeah.
there are a great number of men who are on that journey of
Mhm.
rediscovery and restorative justice that they seek.
Yes.
And
Yes.
I'm frustrated that our criminal justice system doesn't recognize that. If the goal is public safety, there's a lot of guys that are inside who are not a threat.
Right.
in my opinion, to public safety. And my opinion is based on 6 years living,
You were there.
going to groups with well, even
Yep.
more than that. I never disclosed I was an attorney when I was in San Quentin. I just told the
Sure.
guys I was a startup techie guy.
Yep.
But I became the managing editor of the San Quentin News. And
Mm.
we will put in the show notes the link for the San Quentin News. It's just
Wonderful.
sanquentinnews.com, but we'll put it in there.
Yes.
It
Yes.
writes 40 to 60 articles a month that discuss what goes on in the criminal justice system in not just San Quentin, but in California, nationally, and even globally. It writes a great number of articles, but a lot about the different ways that men are seeking to take responsibility for their actions and become contributing members again of their community. And somebody gave me a visual for this that I love, and I'm going to share it with you. It's like if I have one thing to say to our listeners, if you're putting that trust that your family has in you at risk, do everything you can not to destroy that trust. That trust was built up over a lifetime. It's little drops that fell into a bucket.
Right.
And if you've got that trust, it's a nice, heavy, stable bucket that can help everybody and it's full. But when you destroy that trust, you overturn that bucket and now it's empty.
Right.
And you got to make sure you deal with the issues you have to deal with. So there's a solid bottom on the bucket, but you can never refill that. It's drop by drop. It doesn't happen. I still am working to regain the trust, more so of my daughter than of my son, to be honest. But I'm still working very hard at that because I destroyed that trust with my crime. And I have to own that. And part of that process is meeting the kids where they are. This is a term I like to use. Meet them where they are. I learned this from Alice Miller, who's a famous author and psychologist. She was a practicing psychologist for 30 years in Switzerland. This is translated from German into English. It's not that well known here. Her first famous book is called The Drama of the Gifted Child. And gifted does not mean IQ of 160, just a translation error. It's the drama of a child. And her book explaining childhood trauma and the consequences of it for all children. She's talking about everybody, not just those who've experienced traumatic events that justifiably have led to trauma. Again, as one of your former speakers when she was molested as a young girl.
Right.
But she came up with the concept of meeting them where they are. And I love this concept. And so one way to do that is to try to reach out and have as many touches as you can with your children.
Yes.
So before our interview, and in fact, it's a tradition of mine, if I'm speaking about parenting and fatherhood, I go back for the 7 days prior to our discussion and I count how many communications I've had with my kids across the various platforms. It's usually a text message or Instagram or Snapchat. Like my daughter likes Snapchat. My son's okay with Instagram. We use text all a lot, right?
Good.
In the past 7 days, I had 259 communications. Now, many of them could simply be one word, love.
Sure.
Or it might just be a thumbs up to something that was said.
Right.
But the point is, it's virtually always daily, and it's very open, and it's very comprehensive. We discuss my daughter's dating life and the fact that she's a senior in high school and trying to decide which university to go to and the traumas and opportunities that represents. With my son, he's spending a semester in Washington, D.C., where his university has a satellite campus. So we're talking about his internship. He does 3 days a week, as well as his classes, as well as his desire to get an internship, not this summer, but next summer, because he's worried about where he's going to get a job when he graduates. And so he has to do a lot of interviewing and all of that. But the point is, they're willing to share their struggles with me.
Meeting them where they are.
Meeting them where they are, and then being an enlightened witness when you do.
Sure, of course.
Meet them where they are, but then being an enlightened witness, which means don't tell them what to do, but make sure they're making an informed decision about what they're doing. Ask them questions. Don't tell them what to do,
Yes, no, I have a
and that's not easy.
son, and that's delicate. You have to take a delicate walk over that, right?
Oh yeah, my daughter deciding what university she wants to go to. Trust me, I got an opinion on this one, right?
Yes.
But
Yes.
she's got to decide. She has to own it. She
Yes.
has
She
to
does.
own it. And
Mhm.
I want to give her the space to do that, but I'm still going to ask her questions to make sure she's making an informed decision. I think too
Absolutely.
many parents just allow their kids. They think they're helping them by saying yes, and it's like, no. Enlightened witness doesn't mean yes. It could well mean,
That's right.
hey,
Yep.
what?
Yeah.
What
Yeah.
did you do, or what do you
Right.
want to do? Here, let's talk about
Exactly.
this. You know,
Yep. Nope.
um,
Exactly. And then they know you're engaged. They
and
know
they
you're
know you're
engaged.
engaged.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
know you're
And
engaged. That's a
and
great way of putting it.
yeah. And see, to me, Wayne, in what you have demonstrated in the journey that you've gone through, and them as being witnesses, and and being impacted by it, you are the quintessential example of of what we should represent to our children from a humility standpoint. Okay, we don't always get it right. We're parents. We're not always right. There's times when we fall short. A lot of times we're human just like them, and whenever something happens that's not in our favor, we must own it. It's the same thing that you're teaching your daughter in, her plans for higher education upon
Mm,
after high school graduation. What she decides, and it's an informed decision she must then own, right? And
mm,
not only are you expressing that, you have demonstrated that by being the example. And that is, to me, I mean, that just closes the loop and makes it totally solidified and gains credibility with your children. And speaking of like your children and and your daughter and so forth, Wayne, I want to ask you a question about
mm.
second chances. Okay, second chances. It's a short, simple question. I don't know if it requires a complex answer or not. Maybe it does, but I wanted to ask you, Wayne, are second chances a two-way street?
Of course,
Mhm.
um, of course.
And in what
Um,
ways do both have to work
um,
together to make the second chance work?
it, a lot of the way I look at the world is if you're oriented in the right way,
Yeah,
um, information has become limitless, frictionless, and free.
yeah,
We're inundated, overwhelmed.
yes,
So the issue, I don't want to talk about a study or a fact or something like that. But if
right.
you're oriented the right way,
Mhm.
you have a chance of actually addressing issues in their proper place.
Yeah,
So a second chance is never deserved,
it's
right?
earned.
I think people get that wrong.
Yeah,
You know, you ha-
yeah,
if you get a second chance, it is a gift,
yes.
and you should be acknowledged that way. I think way too many people, especially if they're sucked in the victim mindset, think they deserve things. It's like,
I
no, no,
got you.
you don't deserve. Um, uh, how do I say this? Uh, the way that I see things. Let's take the word respect, which is used a lot in prison and
Right. Yeah,
misunderstood in
yeah,
prison.
right.
Nobody deserves my respect.
Yeah,
You got to earn my respect. You
right,
deserve my courtesy. You
yep,
deserve me to be polite and
yep,
treat you like a human being. But
right,
you don't deserve my respect. You want my
right.
respect, you earn it. That's
That's
the
right.
way I look at it. That's the example I try to leave. And it doesn't matter what you do.
Yeah,
So I got disbarred as a lawyer because of my crime, justifiably so.
right.
And at the level I was working at, these guys don't want to take risks. I can't get a job in that space again. I'm an alcoholic to them, right?
Okay.
Even if I know that I take my sobriety seriously and I haven't had a problem with it, there's no
Yeah.
reason they should risk their career or their business on it, right? I get that.
Uh-huh.
So I do whatever I can do. I've had 28 jobs in the 5 years since I've come home.
Mm,
I do anything. One
yeah,
of those jobs is working as a server at a catering company.
I
It's
see.
a high-end catering company. I mean, I've
Sure.
catered Gavin Newsom events and,
Yeah.
the Goo Goo Dolls have played and all this other stuff, yeah.
Oh,
But
wow. Yeah.
I'm serving I'm serving at events I used to attend.
Yes.
That's how
Yes.
far I've fallen. I like to say I fell, right? I
Oh,
fell from
yeah.
grace.
Right,
I've
right.
fallen. Um, yes, and a lot of people still think I'm a black sheep. I think I'm a black swan, and if I get a chance to explain why, hopefully they can see that. But I'm a black sheep to a lot of people and to my
Mm,
kids, right?
yeah.
I got an Ivy League law school degree. I'm at a catering company, but I
Mhm.
also knew my kids had to learn the value of money and the value of hard work. So this
Yeah.
past summer, I had both of them join me and work with me at the catering company as
Good.
servers because I wanted them to learn the dip. Yes, my daughter was also an intern in the San Francisco DA's office, and
Yeah.
yes, my son also interned at a hedge fund, but they
Yeah.
still had to work these catering gigs because I wanted
Yeah.
them to learn what real work was. And I got to tell you, one of the happiest moments I ever had. You had asked, "What do we learn from our kids?" It's one of the questions that you wanted to ask. I'm probably stepping on your line, but I
No,
read
you're
that in our
fine.
notes, and for Father's Day, I asked the kids, I says, well, what have you learned
Yeah.
from me?
Yeah.
You know, and my son said, uh, Dad, I got to say, I'm surprised. Everybody at the catering company
Yeah.
loves you and wants to work with you.
Yeah.
The other servers, the front of the house, the back of the house, the cook,
Right.
the
Mhm.
owner, they
Mhm.
all want to work with you. And you always step up. You never step back. If there's
Mhm.
a problem, if somebody drops a tray of glasses, you're the first one there with a broom and a dustpan, even if
Yeah.
it's not your assignment.
Yeah.
If somebody doesn't have water at their table and it's not your responsibility to manage that table, you're
Mhm.
pouring water at that table. And so I was able to be that example for him. Now,
That's
I
great.
hope he learns, I hope he has the most successful career that he wants. And I
Yes.
hope he's financially stable and happy
Mhm.
and has all of that. I'm not saying he has to do what I did, but I
No.
wanted to show him that your job is never to step back. Your job is to step up and help when you
100%.
can help and be there
Yes.
for others.
Yes.
And do it with a smile on your face. Don't act like
Yes.
it's a
Happily.
chore. Yeah,
Right. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
they've seen that, right?
Good. Yes.
They've seen that. They don't
Yes.
know that when I was in South Korea working there, I met George Soros and Michael Bloomberg and the
Yeah.
King of Norway. They don't
Yeah.
know these things. That's
Right.
not the dad they know. The dad they remember went to prison and came out and has a hard time paying his bills. But at
Yeah.
least they know I take whatever I do seriously
Yeah.
and I act like a professional and I'm not bitter about it. I'm grateful to have that job. Um,
I tell
uh,
you, that's awesome. Another facet in how you demonstrate the example to be to your children and giving them a glimpse into, participating in this catering job. So, they can learn what real work is like. And it teaches humility as well, and it removes the sense or feeling or even assumption of entitlement.
Which
And
is usually subconscious. That's the problem. You got to bring that
yeah,
into
yeah.
reality. You got
Yes,
to
you
bring
do.
it into the world.
Yeah,
Now they can see now when they get irritated when they're
yeah.
serving. I tell you, one of the greatest things about this job, I get told thank you a
Oh,
hundred
yeah.
times a night.
Yes, I
And,
believe it.
you know, that my unconscious, subconscious mind needs to hear that probably more than my rational self does, but it
Right?
feels good to be told thank you that many times. But they can learn what an obnoxious guest is
Oh,
and
sure. Easy.
commit that they'll never be that type of guest
Yeah. No.
themselves. They're learning important lessons. That's true. That's
Right.
true.
And not only that, take that high road and maintain, your civility, maintain your courtesy. There's a way to maintain your courtesy and dignity in the midst of that, with
Absolutely.
with the wrong customer, and still, you know, feel good and about yourself after the fact, and not blame yourself or beat yourself up for, say, losing your cool. Um, Wayne, this is absolutely fabulous. I mean, you have given us so many lessons throughout your time in prison, as well as what you've learned during your journey as an attorney, and throughout your family aspect of your life with your ex, with your children. This is absolutely tremendous. As we get close to wrapping up, I wanted to ask you this question, and you know what? Quite frankly, um, based on the context of this question, if you choose to forego responding, just let me know,
Mm.
and we can always edit this out. But especially being a former attorney, this is why I kind of preface with what I just said there. But this is something I was interested in knowing. In your experience on this side of the justice system, okay, um, and in the lessons you've learned about redemption, forgiveness, second chances, transformation, is there anything you feel that can or should be applied to our justice system for improvement?
Um, yes, there are many easy, clearly beneficial steps that can be done
Mhm.
both at the federal as well as at the state, as well as at the local or county level. We really have three different prison systems. We have a
Yeah.
county jail or a city level,
Yep.
we have a state prison system, and then we have a federal prison system. They're
Yes.
all distinct and they've all got their unique challenges and opportunities
Right.
that can be done within them. And they're all failing in their own unique ways. I hate
Yeah.
to put it that way.
I
Yeah,
understand.
there's a lot of ideas that
Okay.
are being test marketed, shall we say, at San Quentin right now.
Okay, good.
I commend Governor Newsom and in his attempt to create what he's calling a rehabilitation center and
Okay.
converting San Quentin from a normal prison
Yeah.
into a more unique prison. There are many
Okay.
challenges with the way they're trying to do that.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to get into the weeds about what those challenges are,
Sure.
but
Sure.
the aspirational goal is wonderful. And I think if our goal is public safety as it should be,
Yes.
right? Public
Yes.
safety is number one.
Yes.
Um, but our goal in many times is not, we claim it is not punishment per se.
Right.
Punishment is removing you from society. That's
Right.
supposed to be the punishment.
Right.
But in reality, these systems in many ways are designed to heap on levels of punishment well beyond necessary for public safety. It's malicious at times, to be honest.
Mhm.
And at the same time, the goal of public safety is paramount, is first, and should be dealt with. I'll give you an example of one of the. I speak at a number of panels on topics like this. So I spoke at one, just a little over a year ago, and
Mhm.
the panel, there were six of us on the panel, and I was the only white guy, an Asian, two blacks, and two Latinos. Right, was
Okay.
on the panel, and
Right.
they asked me, well, what's the biggest difference between all of you guys up there? And I said, well, the
Mhm.
biggest difference between all of us is I've got a head of hair and the rest of these guys are bald. Um,
Right.
I don't want people using race as an excuse, even though it is
Yeah.
a legitimate issue and has to be addressed. I'm
Right.
not
Right.
saying that,
Right.
but it becomes a defense mechanism. We don't need it
Yes.
as a defense mechanism.
No.
And so I challenged the parole process in California because California has a disproportionate number of guys that are on what are called indeterminate life sentences. So they're
Okay.
sentenced to 20 years, which is a set sentence, to life. So after 20 years, they get to go before the parole board. And if they're found suitable, they get out. But if they're not found suitable, they could stay in until life. But they'll have a number of different hearings to assess whether they're safe to come back to society or not.
Right. Right.
And
Right.
so we had a retired lieutenant in custody, uh, black man, African American, uh, and he was explaining the benefits of the system and how well he thought it was going.
Yeah.
And I, when they finished, rather than going to the next question, I says, I got a question for the lieutenant. And I said, Lieutenant, I know that you personally have written a number of letters to the parole board for certain inmates who are getting ready to have a parole hearing. Lieutenant, how many of your fellow officers have written a letter like that?
Mhm. Mhm.
And he had to admit, virtually none of them have. So
Okay.
if I were to change one thing in the system, I would make it what's called proactive, not reactive. And so
Mhm.
I would get the officers who are in there to have a commitment to write letters for inmates who are going on parole in whatever form, so they can recognize this man is going to go back to society. Their orientation is they want to keep you there for life. How do I change that orientation? The way I change that orientation is have a requirement that they write these letters. And it'll also give them a little humility to get to know these guys a little bit better. And it'll also get the inmates to have the mindset that I better not be an asshole to all of these guys, because one of them might be writing a letter for me. It wins all the way across the board.
Yes.
That's a change I would make. And it's not I find a lot of the laws that change are useless. They make you feel good, but they don't really have an impact.
Right.
If you look 5 years down the road of some of these criminal justice reform efforts, they've had a de minimis impact on the system, in my opinion. But here's a real thing that could really be done that could have a real impact on both custody as well as those who are incarcerated.
I tell you what,
requirement that they write a letter.
Wow, Wayne, that hits straight between the eyes for a response. It really and truly does. And I don't care whether it's city, state, or federal, okay? And whatever problems they have, your response hit right between the eyes, and no one can claim they didn't understand your response. I want to thank you for that response, because that is something that you can truly speak to, and it's what you lived. And I tell you, I mean, I hope, to San Quentin's credit, and to the governor's credit, okay, for them to be trying out these types of programs and so forth, that means a lot. It says a lot. And I'm hoping that in time, like everywhere from the warden to the guards, and change that culture in from the old traditional mindset of keeping these guys caged up forever, to rehabilitating them, from and also with a priority of safety, into society again, to where they can
safety first,
right? Safety first, 100%. So Wayne, how can the listeners follow you or connect with you and learn more about about your journey, and subscribe to your blog?
Well, thank you for offering that. Aubrey, I actually like to write. I was a lawyer. I like to write more than I like to talk. And I've found that, I went to prison in 92. I had 2012. I went to prison in 2012. I had a BlackBerry. Okay. I got out. Technology's changed a lot. The world's changed a lot since I've come back. And I look at the world with new eyes. And so I write a lot about things that I see differently. For example, I wrote one criminal justice system in 6 books, 6 themes that we could make it different. I talk about, my experience in prison. I talk about also, does inclusivity trump all? Should women with physical bodies be allowed to compete in female sports if they're transitioning? Election security. I talk about a lot of different things, and everything I write is, even though I use what's called Medium and I use Substack. You'd mentioned Substack earlier on. That's even though that platform does have a paywall, all my stuff is outside the paywall. It's free, open for anybody if they're curious about any of these topics and about my journey with my children and the work that I've done to reweave the tapestry of our relationship, to get back into their lives and to be worthy of their trust. They don't owe it to me. I have to be worthy of it. So
and just like that road to rediscovery, it's also a road back to their trust.
Yeah. And I that is my aspirational goal in life, is to earn their trust. The happiest day in my life would be if my daughter lets me walk her down the aisle when she gets married.
Oh my goodness. Yes.
She's only 18. I'm not in a rush.
No.
But I still have to earn it. I still have to earn it.
Yes, you do. Yes, you do. And I can't tell you how much I appreciate your transparency and your sense of realness in knowing these things, and not just knowing them, but articulating them and emphasizing them. It means a lot, because and to me, it also kind of prophesizes that you will overcome these things. You will regain that trust. You will regain, the level of respect and adoration amongst your children. And you are and you will be seen as a black swan and not a black sheep, right?
That's
Your
that's
wings will spread. You will fly, right? So. Well, if you'd like, with your permission, Wayne, I would love to have the link to your blog in the episode show notes, so the listeners can look at what you write and really take it in.
Thank you, Aubrey. I appreciate that.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Wayne, we've come to the end of a great conversation, man. I want to humbly ask you to please consider in the future maybe coming back on the show. I want to stay in touch with you. I truly mean that from my heart of
Thank you.
hearts, and I can't
Thank
thank
you.
you enough for coming on the show, sharing your journey, sharing your insight, being vulnerable and transparent with our listeners.
Thank you for saying that. I'd like that. I'd like us to
Oh,
stay in touch, and I can
yes.
only hope that if somebody can learn from my journey and not continue on the path to destruction
Mhm,
that mine led down to,
mhm.
I would be very happy to hear that, because my victim paid the ultimate price. She can't
Yeah,
choose anything,
no.
but these people listening can choose.
Yeah,
Uh,
they sure can. And that's what this show's all about. That's what it's all about. And I want to thank all of you for tuning in and listening. And you may feel like this at times, but in our daily struggles and adversities, we're never alone. Hope is always around the corner. I humbly ask that you please share this show with someone you know needing motivation and support. And always remember that we're all roadies on this journey of life. And it sure feels good having you on the road with me. Thanks again for listening. We'll chat again soon. We really hope you enjoyed this episode of The Road to Rediscovery. We'd love to hear from you. Shoot us an email at roadtorediscoverypodcast@gmail.com and leave us any questions or comments you may have.